Hi guys, this is Dr. Ann-Louise Lockhart joining up with you once again as we wrap up October. So in case you have missed it, we have been doing a whole bunch of October Awareness Month events and discussions on everything from bullying prevention, ADHD awareness, domestic violence, SIDS, breast cancer, pregnancy and infant loss. We're doing all these different things. So hi guys, thank you so much for joining. And, so we're talking about all these things, all these diagnoses, all these things that people experience. And we want to make sure that we talk about the healing. So if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Want to make sure everybody can hear me. Can you hear me? Yeah? Christine, hi. You can hear me good? Sound is good? Hi, Arjun. All right, are we good with sound? Are we good? Good, awesome. All right, so, we want to talk about, okay, we've gone through these things. You have a diagnosis. You have gone through a disease. You've gone through, these turmoil, the trauma, all these different things that we've talked about, some pretty heavy topics. And we also want to then be able to discuss how do you heal from that. And that's so important because our mental health is really, really important to address because mental and physical health are so connected that we can't address one without the other. You can't look all good and cute and have a rocking body and good nutrition, but then your mental health is not in a good state. And you can't also be clear in your mind and thoughts and everything, but you're not taking care of your body. So we want to make sure that we take a very holistic approach. So that's why I wanted to be able to team up with Dr. Nicole from the Holistic Psychologist right here on Instagram. And many of you probably already know her because she's amazing. And she and I have been in communication for quite some time now, both as psychologists and both really dealing with individuals from a holistic perspective. So I think that's really important to make sure that we address because we want to make sure that we really look at the mind, body, soul, spirit, nutrition, everything. So that's going to be key. So hopefully we can connect here. So Dr. Nicole, whenever you're ready, go ahead and send the request and we'll just wait a few moments to make sure that everybody joins up. And if you... Yeah, nice.
Here I am.
Hi, there you are.
Here I am.
Yay.
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfect. How about me?
Perfect. It all looks good.
Awesome.
Good.
Here we are.
So thank you so much for joining. I know that we both have really busy days and things are crazy hectic. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about this really important topic.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. I love conversations like this and connecting, especially with fellow practitioners who practice similarly. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. So you want to jump right into it and talk about this really cool topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my spin on all things healing, and I share with people, a lot of you, if you follow me or people I work with, it comes from, I guess, specifically my own healing journey in terms of my own personal life, anxiety. It wasn't until several years ago where I started to have a lot of symptoms. I thought they were just regular life stuff, stress experiences happening to me, but they really started to take a turn. I started to look into the physical component of it. So at which time I really started to expand, I think, my concept or how I define mental wellness for so long, from the work I was doing to the schooling that I received, a lot of it, to really include the body part of things. So now the way I define healing, it has to include some physical aspects, some lifestyle changes, some nutritional changes. Like I said, I've lived the process myself and healed from some long-term, as long as I can remember, childhood-based anxiety, panic, and I'm getting a lot of great results in the people that I work with. So my version of healing now involves the body, and the body is an integral part of all things mental wellness.
Definitely. So then how did you even come to know that? Like, how did you realize that in order to heal from the stuff that you were dealing with and even suffering through, how did that come to you?
So Yeah. So like I said, I had anxiety, I had things like that. I discovered mindfulness, which is an approach that I use still in my current work, in my personal life, years ago. And it would work. It helps my anxiety somewhat. But it never actually went away. And again, like I said, that's when I started to make up this story that I would talk to my friends. Everyone else felt similar. So I thought, this is okay. This is life. This is my late 20s. This is now my early 30s. I was kind of progressing through. This is what life means. But like I said, I had a couple incidents. I fainted on a couple of occasions. I had this crazy experience of literally having lost my thoughts. It wasn't this scenario where, I think a lot of us can relate to this. Oh, I'm talking, I forget what I'm saying. It was this really weird kind of brain-based, like empty, like, whoa, blank feeling. At that point, I of course, my anxiety started to take a hold of me a little bit. And I started thinking, oh my God, what is wrong with me? So I think my research, if I'm honest, started a little bit in that vein of like, okay, do I have something diagnosable, physical, wrong with my brain? Of course, that's where I located the problem to be. But as I started to do research, I started to connect with a lot of other kind of integrative medicine, holistic approaches that people were taking that were starting to identify nutrition and the gut. Of course, I dove down that rabbit hole, and it is a rabbit hole. I think that and I think this is why a lot of times when people consider, if they are aware that, okay, maybe nutrition is playing a role, I think a lot of times this is why it's very overwhelming, because it's a lot of information. It's a lot of contradictory information. So I became very overwhelmed by it, but started to make sense of it and really tried to step back throughout my whole process with it and just kind of think logically, but also to experiment. I went and I changed my diet. I changed my lifestyle, and I did it for long enough that I, kind of was able to start to assess, was I seeing myself get better? Was I seeing myself get worse? And then I started to have the real, I think, kind of biofeedback of my own body, and it's shifting and changing. And over time that translated to emotionally. So then I just used myself as, I think, the guiding post between all of this information, and started to sift through it and started to really realize kind of what was making sense, not only logically for me at this point. And obviously the student came out, research and this and that, but I think I evolved to, and this is kind of what I preach always, is a move toward a more intuitive model. And what I mean when I say that is developing the confidence that I know that my body can know and can tell me. And I think if you do the right steps, you can clear out your body space to do that and to get these feedbacks that then you can use yourself. So for me, if I eat something that doesn't work, I'll know. It won't be, it will be pretty clear. And then I can obviously make the choice if I want to continue to eat that same thing with lifestyle, etc. So it was a little bit of sifting through what was out there. It was a little bit of applying it to myself and seeing kind of what changes I felt. Yeah, but it was start at the moment where it was like, bang, something is wrong.
Right. But you listen to your body, right? You listen to your body. I think so many of us, we hear what our body is saying if we are in tune enough with it. And then we're like, oh, whatever, I'll just eat what I want. I'll just do what I want. I'll smoke what I want. And then we kind of then wonder why we're suffering, because we're not listening. We're not listening to our triggers and seeing that, okay, well, if this is what happens when I do this, or if this is what happens when I eat this, then maybe I need to then evaluate what is it about this that's causing this reaction.
I love that. And the way I would agree 100%. And I always use this kind of terminage. We overthink. We let our mind take over, right? What we want it to be, what we think it should be, what we're maybe told it was or wasn't, starts to override. I think a lot of times we live more in our minds, our thinking minds, than our intuitive feeling bodies. And like you said, we could be having a symptom or a something, but just be totally unaware of it or explained it away because of our thinking mind.
Right. Or because your friend was able to eat the same thing or do the same thing and they didn't have the same reaction. It's like, well, our bodies and our experiences are so different. And we have to really pay attention to that, And I think it's also that, one of the things that you talk a lot about, and I totally agree with, is mindset, right? Because your body responds to whatever your mindset is. And I remember even as a kid, I have a long family history of migraines. And I had them as a child too. They were very inconvenient. And I remember I would tell myself, when I was like, you know what? Every time I want to do something important, this stupid migraine comes up. And I would take a Tylenol, and then within like 5 minutes, it would be gone. And my sister would tell me, that's impossible. It's not even in your bloodstream yet. And I was like, well, it's gone and I'm better.
That's right.
And I remembered early on, I'm like, yeah, she's right. The medicine isn't even working in my bloodstream yet. Why am I feeling better? And it was because I was determined to feel better. And I was determined to no longer be a migraine, person that has inherited migraines from my family. I was no longer going to accept it. No longer.
Yes.
So I think that's why it was really important, because after, the doctor was like, well, it's just in your family. It runs in your family. That's what it is. And, I think we also have to realize once we rule it out in terms of medical reasons, what else can we do to make sure that we address it? So there's a question here too. We're not to listen to our bodies. We're taught to freak out and go to the doctor when experiencing symptoms, and doctors are taught to treat the symptoms. We're literally ignoring the giant elephant. That is so true. That is so true. That we are basically taught, yes. And, nothing against doctors. That's what they're trained to do, right? You have a symptom and you surgically remove it, treat it, or medicate it.
And in a lot of ways, I think, to speak to that person's question, it's exactly that. We've internalized this doctor as the seat of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And ourselves as not even on the list.
Right. So then we kind of ignored our intuition, and then we say, well, this is what they say, so let's just go this route, when there could be so many other things going on. Right.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it, from my particular personal experience too, we get a lot of messages a lot of times in our, whether it's family of origins, caregiving environments, cultural, societies, neighborhoods, whatever, that also, I think, speak to that point, which is which things are controllable and which things aren't. And I even think, kind of on the macro, the biggest shift, or at least the new science, it's not so new anymore, but that is epigenetics that's emerging. It really speaks to that point. We really came from, societally at large, a very deterministic, genetic, reductionistic model of things.
Right.
And I think it's evolving, but we have to really consider what messages were we given in our families, right? A lot of us, I think, had legitimate messages that you will or will not get this or that because Grandpa Henry had it and now I have it. And, from that to even, share characteristics, oh, you're just like that because that's what dad is, there's so many different ways where I think we are given layers of messaging that then we internalize. And then I think that continue to affect us as we show symptoms or do need to make changes, whether or not we think it's possible or not. It's so ingrained.
Right. And to break those generational narratives and ties, right? Because often why we continue to suffer is because our family keeps telling us, well, everybody in this family suffers with blank, so you're just destined to do it, right? And so then we just accept it because, well, my mom was obese and my daddy had hypertension and everybody else had it, so I'll just get it. And then it just becomes, oh, well, that's why I have this, because everybody else in my family has it. And we kind of invite it.
I mean, kind of invite it. You touched on the mindset piece, and I think what drew me into the profession that of psychology is I've always thought the mind was so powerful. I never knew exactly how much, and all of the learning and kind of evolution that I'm seeing, again, not only in my personal life but professionally, really does highlight, to speak to your point, the mindset of things. What we believe truly, and I can make arguments down to physiologically why it's the case, energetically why it's the case, that the way we think and the way we feel actually does, affect what happens. So your mindset, back to the migraine, your belief, literally, that would help was enough to, I could make an argument, shift your physiology into it no longer being painful, right? And changing the way you are legitimately experiencing that moment that could be different from someone who takes a medicine and thinks this will never work. Chances are it won't.
It won't.
It's so fascinating, no the mind piece.
Right. Exactly. And that's why I don't suffer from migraines anymore. I truly believed I was going to heal and that I wasn't going to be a victim of this. And many family members still suffer with it because they don't believe that they can. And I think that's a really big piece, is that you can literally heal your body and all the physiological things about your body if you just change your mindset and the way you approach things. And I don't think people realize how powerful that is. And even when I see patients too, who they're taking all this medication, they're doing all the oils, they're doing all the diet changes, but they're not believing they can be healed. They're not believing that anything is going to work. And so they have like a plan B. Oh, in case none of this stuff works. It's like, well, but you're already setting yourself up not to get healed then.
Your body knows that plan B. Your body will know that doubt, in all seriousness. I think you're right. And I do think a lot of times, while we might want to think we believe that whatever it is to be the case, on some level, a lot of us struggle with layers of doubt. And I think it, as counterintuitive as it is, I think that there's something inherent in knowing that we do have that amount of power, that's scary as well.
Yeah.
I think stepping into our own personal responsibility, and I see people struggle with this across the board in so many different ways, whether or not it's the personal responsibility that I have over my mind versus to the extent of the responsibility I have over, what I'm doing actively in life. I think that's scary. I can obviously reframe it as how empowering, right? Now the control is in your hands, but I think with that empowerment, there's fear. What if I can't do it? What if I will sell myself short? What if it won't be the case for me? I'm the only one who this won't be the case for. And I think that's enough sometimes to make this empowerment seem too much, too overwhelming. I don't want to. And I think that's maybe a place. And again, doubts come from everywhere. But I think that there's something that's scary, quite honestly, about acknowledging that we have more control than we think.
Exactly. So what we're talking about here is looking at, as I've talked about on my page, about, all the awareness months that we're dealing with, the breast cancer, the SIDS, the infant loss, ADHD, bullying, all those different things, whatever it is that you've gone through, whether it's medical based, whether it's psychological, social, whatever, is that the healing is still possible. And that our mind and body connection is so important, because when we can integrate those two, we can really find a life that's more fulfilling, more authentic, more genuine, and that's fulfilling, right? So then, Nicole, we had talked about earlier, like, what is the process then? Like, what are the steps that we need to take to get to that point where we can overcome whatever it is that we've gone through?
Absolutely.
What do we need to do?
You got it. I think my first step is always, like I said, we cannot achieve any form of my underlying belief is we can't achieve any any emotional balance without having an underlying physical balance. Because a lot of times, myself included, I think a lot of the symptoms that we have that we're, calling these diagnoses are the result of nutritional issues, whether it's actual gut damage, whether it's nutritional deficiencies. There's extensive research out there now that really is originating. All these neurotransmitters that we had heard for a long time were based in the brain and were the reason why we're anxious or depressed. We don't have enough of it. They actually come from the gut. So again, I think that emotional balance will not really fully happen unless our body, down to our hormonal systems, is as balanced as possible. So I say all that to say that nutrition is always my first go-to step. What are you eating? Everyone that I work with that comes, wants to work with me holistically, what does your diet look like? I have glaring suggestions that I make right off the bat of foods to remove. Again, I think nutrition is an area that's very complicated. There's a lot of different beliefs, and I think my underlying, like I said earlier, I always speak from the place of intuition, because like something you said earlier, what works for me food wise might not work for the person next to me, might not work for the person across from me. So that's kind of what I kind of base everything around. However, there are some foods out there that a lot of us are eating that are very damaging to our guts. Gluten being one of them. Probably hates me to say this next one, sugar being another one of them. I'm Italian, so I love me some pasta and bread, so I get it.
Yes.
Sugar, I came from a very heavily, my mom will probably deny this, but sugar addicted mother. There was sugar in my house. I had sugar before bed. I had sugar in the morning. I had sugar all day long. I was a sugar I like sugar too. So I get how hard it is to do these things, but those two foods cause so much gut damage that beyond our neurotransmitters not having a chance to work, it actually could poke holes in our gut. And that becomes problematic because then we have all these toxins traveling all around up as well to our brain. And then they can actually penetrate our brain. And that, I think, is what is causing a lot of the actual symptoms that we're seeing. So nutrition is first, removing particularly those two foods. If you want to go more extensively, I think that it's best to do something that's called an elimination diet. It's where we set aside at least a minimum of 1 month and we remove all possibly problematic foods. So we remove those foods, like I said, and we never touch those again if we can. And then we have these other foods that for some people they work and some people they don't work. So, but what the elimination diet is, we remove them all and we give our body a return to baseline. We let it do some healing. We let our systems take over. That's the thing. Our body is so naturally, balanced that it's us and the foods that we eat daily and what we do or don't do daily that get in the way of that balance. So if we remove the foods and we do so for long enough, we let our bodies heal and come into a balance. And then we do what is called reintroduction. And this is where we get our individual feedback. We start to reintroduce some of the foods back and see literally how they sit. And a cool kind of personal antidote to this was, before I made my big lifestyle change, diet change, I was vegetarian. So as you can imagine, I ate beans all the time. That was my protein. Chickpeas, black beans, right? Any kind of bean I ate them. I gave up. I went on this elimination diet. I did it much longer than a month. And then I started to reintroduce food, and I was making chili one night, and I thought, can't have chili without beans, And again, these beans are this food that, there's arguments that some people will say they're demons. There's arguments that some people won't. I was like, let me try for myself. I ate beans every day. I ate beans. I've never had such an uncomfortable eating experience. It felt like literally my guts are being ripped out. And I was so taken back by this because beans were my staple. So I say that to say even our own bodies change. When we let them clear out, we will get feedback that we might not be aware of. So then I then can, reintroduce foods. I can discover what works for me. More often than not, we're getting pretty immediate feedback. And then I can know dietarily, by this point, symptoms will start to go away. Once we've removed these toxic foods for long enough, I might start to see a resolution in whatever was a problem, emotionally, mentally for me. Reintroduce the food, lifestyle. I will always talk about integrating breath work. I think that's a really big, huge one that helps to calm our nervous systems. A lot of us spend too much time in our fight or flight. Cortisol is a big problem. So my first step is always nutrition. And then my second step is what sort of lifestyle tools can we start to implement to, again, all for the service of giving our body this balance.
Yes. Love that. So in a practical way, then, how would someone go about looking to see what they need to eliminate and then reintroduce? Who would you recommend they see? What kind of professional?
So I actually think that they don't necessarily need a professional. Like I said, I think that this is, and one of my big shticks is always like, we can do this on our own. Like I always do #self-healing, and I believe in that. Truly believe, and again, I'm a helping professional. I think that people need different levels of supports, accountabilities. I think we can play a great role for people in terms of being an objective observer, that they, pointing out things that they might not be aware about. But when it really comes down to the nitty gritty in terms of what are you going to eat or what aren't you going to eat, I think everyone can do this themselves, to be honest. Again, like I said, I think sometimes, having an outside accountability person or having someone to troubleshoot, because what starts to happen along this process too is the mind gets itself involved. And a lot of people who will struggle both in the elimination diet part of it, phase of it, where we're removing stuff, right? My cravings for sugar, if I'm a sugar addict, are going to be high. A lot of it's going to be psychological, right? So part of this process then is battling the mind piece. So I do think that, having supports and, can be very, very helpful. But I think in terms of the nitty gritty, I think, this information is out there. People like myself, elimination diets are very known. I think though, in terms of the how to, when to, with whom to, I think that people can really be armed with enough knowledge to do so themselves.
To do it. Right. It's a big step to give up some of the things that you've always done. It's huge. So then be able to have someone that you can be accountable to can make a huge, huge difference.
Yes.
And because like you said, it is a lot of information, and you get a lot of conflicting information out there. So sometimes it is hard to kind of do it on your own, because people are like, well, okay, is this good for me or is it bad for me? Is this, like, my body says it feels okay, but then the research is saying that it's bad. So like, which way do I go? So it can get very overwhelming. So Are there any specific resources that you would recommend for people to look at?
In terms of diet and nutrition?
For diet? Yeah.
So some books that I love, Dr. Kelly Brogan, she's a psychiatrist who works out of New York. She wrote a book called Mind of Her Own. I always suggest that. I draw a lot from Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She wrote a book called Gut and Psychology Syndrome, I believe it's called, GAPS. She really touts the GAPS diet. Has a lot of really, fantastic success with people with diagnoses such as autism and things like that. I really kind of follow her protocol. She operates similarly. Let's remove the bad stuff. Let's reintroduce and see what works for you as an individual. So I think those are two of the resources. And then Weston A. Price. I think any kind of his work is really good. He does he went around, I don't know if you guys know about him, he did a lot of research on tribes and ancestral-based diets, and I find that a lot of his beliefs in terms of what's healthy, what's not healthy kind of really align. So those are three good resources. In terms of, I myself recently, I think within the past 2 months, I put out a gut healing guide, a little, 5-pager with steps. So anyone who's interested can check out my website, get on my mailing list. That'll come. I think a lot of internet is a great resource for people who maybe break it down if you don't want to dive into those books in their, kind of totality. A lot of people have, myself included, smaller little primers with how to get started in terms of nutrition.
Okay, great. There's a comment here too. We are integrated beings. Our mental, emotional health affects our physical health, and our physical health affects our mental, emotional health. Both are essential, and helping one helps the other. Yes, totally.
Yes.
Totally agree.
Could not agree more.
And so I think, yes. And then there's another question here for you. So what do we eat for that month? So I'm guessing when we're doing the elimination diet, they're asking so then what the heck are you supposed to eat?
Nothing. No, I'm just joking. There's actually a lot you can eat. There's a lot. Fasting is possibly part of it. No, in all seriousness, anything that whole real foods is kind of my first answer to that. If you are someone who eats animal products, bone broths, any sort of just, animal products, making sure that they're grass fed. We have to be careful with the kind of big farming agriculture animal products because the health of our animal really is going to affect our health. So I have a bunch of resources that I always give out in terms of that. So, animal products, healthy fats, that's going to be huge, especially because I've mentioned sugar cravings a few times. Fat, the more and again, I say this again, I know this is probably controversial for some because we have this belief that's been, for many different reasons that I won't go into now, kind of espoused that fat is bad. In actuality, fat is actually necessary for our bodies, for our mental wellness, for our physical wellness. So I think we need to unlearn that fat is bad mentality and reintroduce and as many healthy fats as we can. So the coconut oils, the olive oil, but not heated, any animal fat, butter, ghee, really, really helpful with sugar cravings. Typically, if in the early stages when I started to feel myself wanting the sweet, if I upped my fat intake in the next meal, I was usually able to satisfy that. It also helps us go longer without feeling because part of it is breaking, I think, the cycle of snacking. The more nutrient dense our food is, the longer. I joked about fasting earlier, but there is research out there that we as humans aren't meant to graze all day long. And I lived by this mentality. I was the biggest proponent of 6 small meals a day. I'd walk around with all my little snacks throughout the day and I'd eat them. There's actually a lot of research out there now that's saying our bodies need time to be not eating. Digestion actually takes a lot of energy and it takes a toll on our body. So if we are able, and part of the reason we're snacking is because we're usually not eating as nutrient dense food that we can. So when we start to up the fats and the good, kind of nutrient heavy foods at mealtime, we find that naturally over time we can satisfy ourselves longer. Right now I eat 2 meals a day and I have no want, and I was a big snacker. I love the taste of them. I love picking out my snacks, but I learned that I just don't feel like I need it anymore. So that's another, I think, huge part. That's a cool part of the process is realizing that we don't need to be eating as much as we think we do because we're satisfied on a different level.
So you're really talking about the intermittent fasting, right? Is being able to kind of fast for a time period. And then also eating more of that healthy fat actually satisfies the sugar craving that most of us are so addicted to.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, so intermittent fasting is kind of the rage and everyone's talking about it. It can look kind of however you want it to look. The way I do it is I eat what is in a restricted time window. So I won't usually have my first official meal until around noon, and I'll try to stop depending on how late I've worked, around 7. 8. So if I give myself an 8-hour window, it's called the 8-16. So from the time I stop eating while I sleep until I wake up the next day, my body is in fasted mode. And I know it probably sounds crazy for people who maybe haven't tried this, but like I said, when you get into, when you're eating the right food and when your body, is using the food more efficiently, when we're not on those kind of spikes of blood sugar, that's why we feel like we need to eat more. It actually is much more seamless than you think. It wasn't so difficult to get here. But in that time period, my cells are repairing and all this good stuff is happening in my body.
That's fascinating. That's amazing. It's like, we said earlier, our body knows what it needs. Our brain knows what it needs. We just got to give it. We got to be intuitive about it and then addressing the needs that it has. And then when we do that, our mood, our body, our weight, our blood sugar, everything else starts to come into balance.
Yep.
Love that.
Absolutely.
Love that. Any other last minute kind of advice or things that you have for people? I want to make sure that, let me see if there's any other questions on here too that we may have missed.
Let me know. And then I do have some advice at the ready.
Let's see. Ansel Keys and his debunked hypothesis.
Yes, I saw that. That's right. Mm-hmm. So Ansel Keys wrote a study saying that fat is bad. He was one of the biggest proponents of fat is bad. He has some skeptical ties, so we can't really believe that anymore. So yes, it has been debunked. Right. Fat is not bad.
There's another question too about what do you think about GMO?
Right. So GMOs, I think, are part of the difficulties that us humans are now having is that our food has been so adulterated. The food that we have now is not like the food that our ancestors ate. So there's not only are things being sprayed in terms of GMOs, which are just pesticide, just really toxic for the human body. I recently saw some study where they were talking about how many toxins are in a person who doesn't eat organic or doesn't try to eat non-GMO food, and it was mind-blowing. Right down to the fact that, again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but some of the food items that we even have access to, like corn is a really big one. Corn as a product now is GMO, period. So we have to be really, so I think an easy way to think about all things GMO is as unnatural as it is, right, as far away from just the ground as it comes, what we're spraying on it, obviously the things we're spraying on it were made in a lab. I call it lab food. Anything that we can trace back to lab, especially when we're looking on ingredient list. When we're doing anything in terms of changing our nutrition, ingredient list, while they might be overwhelming, are our best friend. Anything we can't pronounce, chances are that was made in the lab. Chances are that means that our human body really, it can handle it. That's how beautiful our body is. Our body is so adaptive, it can handle it, but it's not going to be healthy. It's not going to do the things that we need it to do, and it's not going to be nutritionally dense. Right. And our body won't know what to do with it, so then it works harder just to figure out what to do, right? Absolutely. Yep. There's another question here, too. Healing, any recommendations on healing from childhood sexual abuse? Yes. One of the best ways is to work with a qualified mental health provider, really, who can help you with addressing the trauma. And one of the really good evidence-based kind of interventions is prolonged exposure or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Anything that helps you develop and write the narrative out and then addressing the trauma memories can be very healing. So that's going to be really, really important, as well as then working with someone, whether it's a friend, a pastor, a colleague, whatever, to be able to help you kind of work through those memories that you're avoiding, because that's what perpetuates that cycle of holding on to those memories and having it affect you in your current life, because then you just will keep repeating those patterns. There's another question too about intermittent fasting for kids. Is it good or bad? I think for kids, it's probably, I don't have that much I didn't look into the objective research on that, but I mean, my instinct says that, if you're feeding the child nutrient dense foods, and if it's, so what happens, the reason why we can intermittent fast, our bodies are made to do this because they shift over from using sugar for energy to using our fat storage for energy. So inherently, there's no danger in it. We're actually adapted to do that. And we're actually adapted to do that very efficiently. There's some belief that being in this, it's called ketosis. That's what happens when we're in intermittent fasting, has actually a lot of adaptive effects for the human physiology. So in terms of, I don't know what's out there, specifically around children, but they are a human body. So but like I said, you would want to really make sure that you're feeding your child nutritionally dense foods and you're getting your child to be fat adapted. So when you do feed the child, you're not feeding him sugar, because what that means is they're not going to be fat adapted, and it's going to be harder for them, I think, to get the benefits of fasting in that sense. So like I said, if you're doing it right, I guess my gut instinct says it's probably just like an adult would be. And I think also to speak to the point earlier, like I said, Natasha Campbell McBride does do her diet with a lot of children with autism. I'm not sure if she specifically fasts them, but she does do this protocol that I'm suggesting. Obviously, the parents implement it. Obviously, it's not very easy to do so. So I definitely want to acknowledge the difficulty in doing this with children for sure, but has had a lot of success in this sort of diet with kids in particular.
Okay. Terrific. Great. Well, and if there's any other questions that you guys have, feel free, especially if it's really specifically for Dr. Nicole, you want to make sure, then just kind of reach out to her, look at her website at theholisticspsychologist.com. And that way you can address those issues as well. And like she said earlier, she has an Instagram page right here, and see all her wealth of information as well. Thank you. So Dr. Nicole, what else would you like to tell people in terms of getting in touch with you, being able to ask you questions and all those different kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Instagram, I'm on here daily, very often. It's the holistic.psychologist. So come check me out there. I'm always on my stories, blogs, etc. On there is a link to my website. And if you go to my website, you can get that nutrition protocol. The gut healing guide is what I call it, on there. So if you go and you sign up for my mailing list, that will come right to your inbox, as will all of the blogs that I do on a weekly basis. So those are the two best ways. I love community engagement. I am totally here and receptive. I try to answer all my comments, all of my messages, etc. And part of the reason I'm doing this is to speak to a point you said earlier, because it is overwhelming and a lot of us need support. I like to kind of create the community so that I think you can get that. A lot of my community members are very, very engaged. A lot of them are engaging in their own healing process at this time. So that's a very cool aspect of it. But I'm very open. I'd like to hear from you guys in terms of questions. What is of interest? What is confusing? And I use a lot of times that feedback for the next post I'm going to write, or the next blog I'll do, or the next live I'll do. So don't hesitate. I say all that to say, do not hesitate. I'm here. I look forward to it. This is part of why I'm doing this.
Right, definitely. And I know there's a few questions that we may not have gotten to. Please feel free to reach out and ask away. And then that way, she is really good at getting back in touch and with your comments, with your questions. There is a lot of information out there, and we want to make sure that we address those things for you guys too. So thank you so much for taking this time.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the rest of your week. And for those of you who tuned in, feel free. I have one more IG Live coming up this evening at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be talking about getting unstuck and breaking free with Dr. Dominguez. And she is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we'll be talking about really just getting unstuck. So kind of continuing the discussion that we did here today with Dr. Nicole, to be able to look at, okay, now what? We have these things going on. How can we continue to move forward by accepting where we're at, but not accepting kind of the mindset that we've been stuck in? So let's talk more about that. Join me here this evening, and I'll see you guys then. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. All right. Bye, guys.